Hello everyone, I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Best-selling author Brad Thor is back with the latest thriller in his Scot Harvath series. What started with Lions of Lucerne in 2002 continues this year with Black Ice, the 20th novel featuring the former Navy SEAL. Now, Brad Thor's path to becoming a best-selling thriller writer is not a traditional one. He had a very successful PBS show in the late 90s called Traveling Light, and he had already given up once on his dream to become an author. So when life presented a second chance, he took it. And millions of his fans around the world are sure glad he did. New York Times best-selling author Brad Thor, welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, John.
I appreciate you taking the time, Brad. You are turning the temperature down with Black Ice, your 20th thriller featuring Scot Harvath. You use the Arctic as the main backdrop and storyline in this one, Brad. How did you come up with this story?
Well, it is the 20th book. I tell people, John, that my novels are like the James Bond movies. If you want to go see the latest James Bond movie, you can jump right in at that point. You don't need to have seen any of the other ones. So if you haven't read a Brad Thor thriller before, you can start with Black Ice. And the idea came, I'm a voracious reader and I consume a lot of news. I'll read, not front to back, but 3 newspapers a day. And anybody who tells you they read The Economist front to back is a liar. I think they've actually proven that with studies, but foreign policy magazines and things like that. So I'm always looking. I mean, listen, I'm in the beach read business to a certain degree. It's toes in the sand, book in the hand. I want to give you a white knuckle thrill ride. But I call what I do faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins.
Right.
And so there is a new Cold War that's heating up above the Arctic Circle. The US, China, and Russia are in a big power competition up there because the temperatures are rising twice as fast in the Arctic than anywhere else on the planet. And so it's not, this isn't a book about global warming. This is just, it is warmer up there, which means the sea ice is turning to slush for longer periods each year. And that is exposing big natural gas, mineral, oil deposits. And so the Chinese have been jockeying and the Russians have been jockeying to actually take control over the entire Arctic and to box the US out. And we've been late to the game in real life. Former Secretary Mike Pompeo said it was we really were asleep at the switch. We needed to get caught up. And I thought, this is such an interesting area. There's so much happening there. Great place to set a spy thriller.
When readers close the book, like I did yesterday and when I went through Black Ice, when they close the book, what do you want readers to come away with? Do you want them to wipe their brow and say, wow, what a ride? Do you want them to say, wow, what's next? What do you have in mind?
There was a comedian once that said, the best way to go in life is to basically skid sideways into the grave saying, what a ride. My dad loves to say that. And he also says he's going to bounce the check to the funeral home. He's not going to leave a dime to the kids or the grandkids. Robert Frost was famous for saying, no joy in the writer, no joy in the reader. No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. So I am a very organic writer. I don't plot things out with a very intense outline. My buddy Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, Dan is a very meticulous outliner. And I can't do it because I want to have the experience writing the book that you're going to have reading it. If my heart is pounding, if my palms are sweating, if I get to the end and I'm like, wow, what a ride, I know I've done my job as a writer. So I want you to have that feeling of, oh, this thing was incredible. That's me as an entertainer. If one step further, you close the book and you know a little bit more about this spy agency or the way diplomacy is happening in this corner of the world and why it's important, I think I've done my job as an American. And that's the icing on the cake for me.
Now, you said no surprise for the writer, but in some of your books, you've had fairly main characters killed off, I guess if that's the word. Reed Carlton dies. Scott's wife, Laura, dies. Lydia Ryan dies, his colleague. When do you decide to roll the dice with a move like that? Because I would think as people become friends, let's say, with Scot Harvath, they don't want to see him suffer that personal loss.
That's true. That's true. So you have to be careful. My kids bought me a great coffee mug that says "Tears of My Readers." I've been dying when I get a complaint about a character that gets killed off. I want to make a little GIF, just an animated thing of me drinking out of that mug that I can reply with. No audio, just that. It was interesting at the end of Spy Master a couple of summers ago, my book from a couple of summers ago, when I turned in the manuscript. My editor said, I want a little bit more right here at the end. And so I don't want to ruin it for anybody that hasn't read Spy Master. But that last thing that happens was added on because my editor asked me to do it. And it left me for several months wondering what I was going to do. How am I going to pay off what I did at the end of that book in the next book? And it did involve killing off more than one character, actually. Right. So that kind of stuff it's fun. It keeps it fresh for me. And, even before the pandemic and quarantine, I was binge watching a lot of great TV. And as I distilled what I loved about the writing and the acting, I was drawn to things where the teams on these shows weren't afraid to take out a major character, where no one was safe. And I thought, I like that. That's kind of risky. That's exciting. It'll make people want to tune into the next one to see who gets it. And so I adopted a little bit of that in my writing style. Don't do it every time because I don't want people to be, losing characters they love. But if you do it judiciously, you can kind of milk how the other characters are reacting to that and all that kind of stuff going forward for a couple of books.
And one you did early on, for those of us who have been with you for all 20 of the Harvath books, you turned one of the major characters, somebody that Harvath went after at one point in time, and have turned him into a trusted colleague. And I must tell you, again, I don't want to try to ruin this for anybody, so turn it down for the next 30 seconds if you haven't read them yet. But I see somebody who is becoming a family man being a plot in a future potential book with Scott coming to his colleague's rescue. Just something I'm seeing as I see the way Nicholas is kind of played out.
And it also was a very interesting metaphor for Nicholas. And for those of you who haven't read the books, Nicholas suffers from primordial dwarfism. My kids used to watch, it's a funny, people think there's an exotic story behind how I created this character. And my kids used to watch Dora the Explorer, And there was a grumpy old troll who lived under a bridge, and you had to solve riddles to get across the bridge. And I'm Scandinavian, and we love trolls. And there was a little person in our neighborhood in Chicago, and the kids would ask me questions about that person. And the person was always very well dressed, was going to work, looked like an executive. And these things came together in my head, and I thought, what would somebody do who might not be physically strong, but mentally strong?
Right.
And I love the idea of this character. And then one thing I've said about Scot Harvath, my protagonist, is there is no American dream without the brave men and women being willing to protect it, to defend it for us. You can't do what you do. I can't do what I do without those brave men and women. So the idea of the troll in Scot Harvath even wanting more than anything else his own family, and to see the troll reluctant of going into this, what if my child suffers from the same malady I do? And here you've got Harvath that would give anything to have kids in a stable relationship. Right. So it's fun to play with that. So you're looking into the future of Harvath maybe needing to come to Nicholas's aid is not very far from the mark potentially. So good observation.
I saw that yesterday. I was going through the book, and I'm like, you know what he's doing? He's planting a seed here. And it may be in 2 or 3 books, but he's planting a seed somewhere. What you have done as well, I think, Brad, you've described Harvath in so many ways, but there's a paragraph in this one that I thought was just so well written about him. His job has been beckoning him quietly at first, but getting louder. It's more than a paycheck to him. It was a calling. He didn't need the money. He had more money secreted away than could ever spend in retirement. Who is Scot Harvath? Is he a conglomeration of people you know? Is he somebody you'd like to know? Is he somebody this country needs?
So Harvath is a collection of people who I know. Actually, the name Scott with 1 T, he's named after my brother. And my mother did not want to see Scotthor. And when I wrote Scot Harvath with one T, so many readers asked, why only one T? And so I had to weave in my mom's story and make his middle name Thomas. And she didn't want to see Scottthhomas.
Right.
His last name comes from somebody I know who works at the Department of Justice, going after very, very bad terrorists. And then there's components of men and women I know in the intelligence community, special operations community. So he's formed in that way. But I also tell people that Harvath is also my alter ego. The same way I'm sure Bond was for Ian Fleming and Jack Ryan was for Tom Clancy. I joke that the only difference is Harvath gets to do the things my wife won't let me go to. And she always, if I do that within earshot, she always says, I let you go to Afghanistan. And that is true. That was a big deal when I went back in 2008.
Right. You mentioned the men and women who really protect this country. We are in the middle of Camp Lejeune to our east, Fort Bragg to our west, Seymour Johnson to our north. When you hear from members of the military after they read Black Ice, after they read Spy Master, after they read any of your books, do those comments and do those reviews and those thank yous mean more to you than maybe others?
I always appreciate hearing from people, but when I hear from those men and women in the military in particular, and they say, wow, you really nailed it. You got the tactics right. You got this particular situation correct. A lot of men and women, when they're downrange, read my books. The books are, they pick them up in the airport or wherever. When they're downrange on base, they can get them. And so when I hear from them, it really is a compliment because, again, I'm the son of a United States Marine. And so I really believe in service, and I'm so grateful for the service of those men and women who make the American dream possible for the rest of us. So it really is, when they tell me I got it right, that's some of the highest praise that I can receive.
If someone would have told you back in 2002 when you published Lions of Lucerne that you were going to write these books for the next 20 years and create a Thor entertainment group and everything that you've done, what would your reaction have been then?
It would have been hard to believe. And in fact, I needed that reality check a couple of years ago when I came out with the book Backlash. So that was not last summer, summer before.
Right.
And I took second place on the New York Times bestseller list. And I'm very competitive. And I was really hoping to get the #1 slot with that book. I have gotten it before. But I lost out to James Patterson and former President Bill Clinton. And someone who works with me looked at me and asked me a very similar question, John, and said, if you had been told back in your creative writing classes at the University of Southern California that you were going to be in a horse race with an ex-American president and James Patterson, would you have ever believed it? And I'd said, no, I don't. I wouldn't have. So it really, the Midwesterner in me, my parents had told me you approach each day on the job as if it's your first, and that it could be your last. So you want to put everything you have into it. So each year I try to raise the bar in the books and it gets harder and harder and harder. But yeah, it's very seldom I stop long enough and look behind me. In fact, if I could show you on the walls in my office here, for the first time, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, I bought little display. You can see the book behind me right here is on a display stand, but I put all the books facing out on the display stands to remind me of how much there has been over the course of my career as a writer, because I'm always thinking about the next one. And I think it's healthy to take stock and look backwards every once in a while. When
guys like Jack Carr and Tony Tata, who I know you've helped along the way, when they do well with Jack's bestseller books now, and Tony's just came out with another one in his series.
Jason the Lion, yeah.
Yeah, when guys like that say, Brad Thor helped me along the way, but then when they have the success that they have, does that also give you a little bit of a kick?
It does. It's so funny. I joke around with Jack Carr that we both wanted the same things in life. We both wanted to be Navy SEALs and we both wanted to be authors. The only difference is Jack Carr got it in the right order. He was a Navy SEAL first, then became an author. I've been an author, and I kind of missed the window on being a Navy SEAL. And then Tony Tate is a really neat guy. I met Tony through a buddy of mine who used to be in the unit at Fort Bragg. Jack Carr I met through a dear friend of mine who's a SEAL. So I've always seen this business as a rising tide lifts all boats. I want as many people reading as possible. So if I can help good authors, and Tony and Jack are fantastic authors, if I can help them, it's small things. they are not going to get anywhere if they're not fabulous authors, and they are. So if I can crack open a door here or do something there, I'm thrilled to do it. Not only as a thank you for their service, but also because I think it's more books for me to read. I was a big reader before I was an author, and I'll be a big reader long after I stop writing books.
I must say, I must thank you, along with all the books, thank you for the reference to 8-track tapes on your website. Though there aren't many of us who remember 8-track tapes, I sure do. What's the deal with putting 8-track tapes on your website?
It was funny. So what John is referring to, ladies and gentlemen, is I did a playlist to get people in the mood for Black Ice. And there is a very old Russian helicopter, and this crazy team of Russian pilots like to play classic rock. So when we were putting together the playlist and we're looking for images, my art designer, who is just an absolutely brilliant guy, said, all right, well, let's really, since you've got all this 70s music that these Russians like to play in the helicopter, even though it's present day, let's really channel that. So that's where that came from, right down to the image. So I'm glad you liked it.
Oh, I thought I logged on and I saw the playlist, and then I looked up. I said, "Is that an 8-track tape?" I said, "What's Brad?" No, you were probably cassette early on, right? Or do you remember 8-track tapes?
We had 8 tracks. We had the whole entertainment system in the living room that had the TV, the record player, and the 8-track. We had 8 tracks in our car, and I remember my parents had Elvis. And it was, I think the first cassette tape we ever listened to was for the musical Cabaret with Liza Minnelli. We used to drive from our apartment in Chicago to a cottage that my family had in Wisconsin, and we listened to a lot of music. But man, I remember the Elvis in the white jumpsuit holding up the microphone and the spotlight, and that was an 8-track. So
yeah, that's going to be a reference that a lot of people will get a smile from. You mentioned growing up in Wisconsin. You talked about your dad being a Marine. I know your mom was a flight attendant. But what kind of young man was Brad Thor? What kind of child? Good athlete? What were your dreams as a child before you got to SC and studied film and TV production?
You know, I always wanted to write ever since I was a little boy. But the arts in my family were something to make you better rounded. They were never encouraged as a career path. In fact, when I got to the University of Southern California, my dad had said, "You're going to study business administration." And I got into it, and I really, John, I didn't like it. It just wasn't my thing. And I ended up going to the college counseling office and taking what at the time was called the Strong Campbell personality test. And I scored off the charts for writing and publishing. So I switched my major, didn't tell my dad. It only took about 2 report cards hitting the house before he realized there's no more business classes on here. And I had the chat with him. But it is rare, I think, for somebody to have a lot of success in the arts. It can be very, very difficult. But I approach it with the business sense. My parents, like you said, my mom had been a flight attendant for TWA back in the glamour days in the 60s. She became an executive recruiter, had her own company. My dad became a real estate developer. So I got the entrepreneurial bug from both of them. So I treat, even though it's art, it's show and it's business. So I treat it as a business. And I think that's given me a bit of an edge.
Yeah, and you say they have always said that if you're lucky enough to have a career and someone's willing to pay you to do something you love, you better show up every day and give it everything you have. That's a quote I read from doing research before today.
Absolutely. And I tell everybody, John, I don't work for Simon & Schuster. I work for you. I work for the readers. So when you go to Goodreads or Barnes & Noble and you leave your 5 stars, that's my annual performance review. I want to do 5 stars good. I want you to, in fact, I'm such a perfectionist. I want more than 5 stars. I want to make sure that you're happy because I love my career. And my career is not possible without you. So you need to be happy. Of course, I want Simon & Schuster to be happy. But if you're happy, Simon & Schuster's happy.
Now,
the focus for me is on you.
You had a PBS series you did called Traveling Light. You went all around the world. You did very well with that. One would think if you're doing well with that, you would continue along that vein. What sparked, even though you wanted to write, what sparked the change? Because again, if you're doing well in one thing, did that urge just bark too loudly inside you?
It's interesting because it was right kind of your neck of the woods, close by, next state over. South Carolina Educational Television was my partner on the Traveling Light series. So I would go out to Columbia and see them on occasion. You know, I was on my honeymoon and my wife asked me an interesting question, one that you would think you would ask before the marriage, which was, On your deathbed, what would you regret never having done? And before I could grab the words out of the air and stuff them back in my mouth, I said, writing a book and getting it published. And she said, okay, when we get home, you need to start carving out 2 hours of protected time every day and make that happen.
Wow, what a gift.
It was incredible. But the way the universe works, it stunned me, because on that honeymoon, after I made that admission, not long after, we shared an overnight train compartment with a lovely brother and sister from Atlanta. They knew my TV show, and she said, what are you doing after your honeymoon? You're going to make more episodes, I hope. And I said, I'm actually going to write a book. And when we went to exchange business cards the next morning at the train station, lo and behold, she was a sales rep for Simon & Schuster. And she said, if I can help you, if you write that book, I'd like to read it. And if I could help you, I would love to. And it's because of Cindy Jackson and that overnight train ride, having come after my wife encouraging me to write the novel, it just all started falling in place. So
take me back to that first day. You sat down, was it at a typewriter or at a computer screen, and wrote that first sentence, though? Do you remember where you were, when it was, and what was going through your mind?
I was living in Park City, Utah. My wife had finished her residency program and had moved out to Salt Lake City to work with a group of orthopedic specialists. And she became a doc for the U.S. ski team. So we were living in Park City, Utah, and I sat down to write it. And those 2 hours led to 3, led to 4. The story just tumbled out of me, John. And I have to tell you, I got to that very last page where I could write the end. And it was the most incredible feeling I think I've ever felt. One of the most. It's up there with the birth of my children. That'll always be higher, and getting married. But this experience was incredible because I knew I could do it again. After I graduated college, I had saved money. I leased apartments in LA, and I'd saved money to do something no American had ever done. I was going to move to Paris and write a novel. Had never been done before.
Yeah.
I like to joke. And I got 2 chapters into that book, and I had this voice in the back of my head that I think many of us do: don't risk the embarrassment. What if it's no good? What if you can't get a publisher? And I had walked away from my dream all those years earlier.
Wow.
So to finish that book, to start it and finish it, it felt great because I knew I could do it again and again and again. And I would never arrive at my deathbed wondering how might my life have been different if only I could have conquered my fear of failure.
Where does the Lions of Lucerne film stand? I know years ago there was a lot of talk about it actually coming to fruition, but it's been several years since I was able to find anything. Where does it stand now? When are we going to see Lions of Lucerne up on the big screen?
I tell people I could write a book about the twists and turns in Hollywood. And in a town filled with so many beautiful people, I think I've kissed every frog out there. We have it's funny. I have a great entertainment attorney, Scotty, who's become a dear friend of mine. And he has said that he is so happy for every deal that got this close to starting and didn't, because the deal we have now, we had a wonderful executive producer who's super famous, came to me and said, hey, we want to do this with you. And I said, okay. And he said, first of all, I want to start with who would you want to direct it? And I said, well, what's the list? He goes, no list. You tell me who you want. I'm going to get the person. And so I shot for the biggest, best action director I could think of. And he goes, sit by your phone. He got the guy on the phone.
Wow.
We got the director, we got the writer, we got the studio. So now we've all negotiated our deals. Now the contracts are coming, and as soon as every contract is signed, then the studio is going to make an announcement. So I do have a very, very big announcement that's going to be coming. They want this thing to be bigger than James Bond. The budgets are going to be massive.
Cool.
It's going to be. I'm so excited, and it's worth it. If it took 2 decades to get to this point, I wouldn't do anything differently.
I talked to Kathy Reichs and Jack Carr, who both, obviously Kathy with the Bone series and Jack with getting his series with Amazon. And they both told me about the challenges of seeing your work on the page turn into something different. Have you gotten to that point yet? And what have those challenges been like?
So it's interesting. I make a joke from History of the World, Mel Brooks. Once you sign the rights away, they could turn it into Japanese anime or Hitler on ice. You have to go in knowing that. And so because there's so many books, and I also did the one spin-off book, the Athena Project, about an all-female Delta Force team. I go in there. We pitch this as, hey, you big movie studio are buying the Marvel universe, our version of the Marvel universe. There's so many characters and storylines and spin-offs. All I want to do is help you make the best movies possible. So my job is not to tell you how to make movies. You've made a fortune doing them. My job is to help with the writing and that kind of stuff. So it's been very, very collaborative. A lot of the execs have read the books and are fans of the books. So it's been a very good working relationship to this point. So I'm really happy with it.
You spoke a little bit about your wife earlier. After The Last Patriot, I found a piece of research saying that you had to actually sell your house after that book. Was that jarring to your wife and to your family? Take me through what that process was like, because you were the one who was receiving the death threats and everything else like that, but you had to also worry about their safety, I would imagine.
I did, and to this day, I still wonder because so The Last Patriot, the plot was that there were chapters left out of the Quran, and there's historical evidence that suggests the Quran did have material that didn't make it in. But to fictionalize that, to do kind of a James Bond meets Indiana Jones international intrigue story about trying to find those missing chapters and what impact it might have on one of the world's major religions. It raised, the book was banned in Saudi Arabia. We did get death threats. And somebody, I can't say who, but there was somebody with the government who stepped out of his government position to approach me and said, you know who I am. I'm not coming to you as a representative of the US government, but I am going to put at your disposal certain people who are going to help you and your family stay safe. We're going to teach you what you need to do, starting with, you got to move. It's not safe. We had a mail slot. Anybody could have thrown rattlesnakes right into the house. To this day, I worry because the steps we took were good and smart and prudent. But I do wonder if it overshadowed the kids' lives a little bit. If all of a sudden ramping up the security to that degree, you try to insulate the kids, but they see all of it.
Right.
So as a father, my kids are wonderful, well-adjusted, beautiful, beautiful young adults. But I still, as a parent, wonder, could I have kept more of that hidden from them, kind of not let them see the layers we were enveloping ourselves in. But, I did what I felt was the best thing to do at the time to protect the kids and my wife.
But as a dad, though, there's only so much you can say. Hey, we're moving from Chicago to Tennessee. They're going to think something's up, right?
Well, we moved within Chicago. So what we did was we moved within Chicago because the advice we got was make it really difficult for somebody to get you at home. Make them have to get you when you're in transit, because you can change the directions you go and the times you leave and all this kind of stuff. So it actually wasn't the Muslim violence that drove us to Tennessee. It was all the other violence in Chicago that drove us to Tennessee 7 years ago. Yeah, I love that town. I'm sorry to have to have moved.
I often tell people that in my 37 years now in television news, I would not be as near as successful as I would be if not for my wife. With all the hours that I worked putting in here, carving a career, I really owe it more than anything to her. What about your wife, Trish? How important has she been, and does she continue to be, to your success?
Extremely important. She and the kids will bring me dinner if I'm working under a deadline and I'm glued to my desk. She's my first reader, too. I call her Zorro. She's got a special red pen in this beautiful bejeweled red case, and the pen comes out and she'll go through and X out paragraphs and pull them out. And she's got an incredible eye for editing, which is terrific. She catches a lot of stuff. So I'm very fortunate. She's been so supportive of me throughout. I've never heard the word no ever in relation to anything having to do with the books or the writing or the touring or the marketing. Just an unbelievable partner.
When you get a call to get involved with the Department of Homeland Security's Analytic Red Cell Unit, what kind of phone call was that? Hey, Brad, we like your books. We need your help.
Yeah, it was like something out of a movie. For the ladies and gentlemen who don't know what the Analytic Red Cell program is, in the wake of 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security obviously was put together, and they started what I think is probably one of the most aggressive and forward-thinking programs the federal government has ever done, and it was called the Analytic Red Cell Unit. And they realized that the 9/11 attacks were successful because of a failure of imagination on the part of the United States. And they were determined never to have that happen again. So they invited people into the Beltway, the Washington, D.C. Beltway, from outside, creative people like me, Michael Bay, who did the Benghazi movie and the Transformers movies, my dear friend and novelist Brad Meltzer. So they invited us in to help them think, what might attack scenarios look like, what targets possibly could they go after here and abroad. So as the son of a United States Marine, it was an incredible honor to be asked to serve my country in this capacity. It wasn't, hey, pick up a rifle, we need you to go help, retake Fallujah. It was, hey, will you come in and use the gray matter between your ears and help keep us 4 to 5 steps ahead of the bad guys. It was an incredible honor.
Social media sure has changed in the time that you've been writing. Do you consider that a good thing? Or I know you took a couple of steps back recently. Is it now not such a good thing?
Well, it depends. I got a really good piece of advice as I was trying to find my footing over the last couple of years and what my voice should be and everything. The reward scenario, the how you get rewarded, what kinds of tweets go viral and get retweeted and stuff, and how you want to get more next time. So you maybe lean into it a little bit more. It just wasn't healthy. I just thought it was very toxic, particularly Twitter. I'm very active on my Facebook page and there's no politics there. But I had a wonderful, wonderful digital guru, Seth Godin, who's a brilliant guy. You always see him with his yellow glasses and all his publicity photos. I had dinner with Seth Godin and Dave Ramsey, the financial expert. And I asked Seth, I said, I'm trying to kind of figure out where I should be in this space because I've got a lot of people who enjoy my political commentary, my geopolitical stuff about how we should be facing Russia and China and all that. And Seth looked at me and he said, Brad, never forget that the name of your company is Thor Entertainment Group. Your middle name is literally entertainment. If you are not entertaining as many people as possible, then that's probably not the right thing that you're doing. So it was great advice from Seth. So I dialed stuff back and all of that kind of a thing. And we're at a point right now where I could say the sky is blue, and there's going to be people that don't like that.
You got it.
So I want to entertain people. That's my job as a thriller writer, as a partner with Simon & Schuster, a partner with Hollywood. So I really do want people to turn to me for entertainment. I got a great sense of humor, but even that's been dialed down now because I don't want people to take things the wrong way. Unfortunately, we're not laughing as much. I went back and listened to an interview that I had several years ago on a radio show where it was kind of a morning zoo sort of a thing. And there was nothing offensive, but it was really funny. And I kind of stopped and said to myself, could we make those kinds of jokes now? And I'm like, well, maybe. I don't think so. I'm going to just stay away from it. So,
well, you have been entertaining people for an awful long time. Black Ice is the new one. I tore through it this past weekend. It comes out for everybody else on the planet July the 20th. What's next? You got another book coming out next year, but what is your research taking you, if you can give us a couple of clues?
I think I can give a couple of clues. As you know from reading the books, I created, so to go with Scot Harvath, I challenged myself women are never sex objects in the books. They are always integral to the successful outcome of Harvath's missions. And I created this beautiful Norwegian spy, and I wanted her to maybe be a little bit better than Harvath. And the only place he's got her beat is experience because he's older than her. And people have loved this character of Solvay Kolstad, and they love the romance between Harvath and Solvay. And I was hoping my female readers, and I've got a lot of them, would love Solvay. But the guys, and they do love Solvay, the female readers, but the men are crazy for her. They want me to give her her own book. They love her background as a Norwegian Special Forces soldier. So they've said, would you consider doing her own book? So I've got a whiteboard in my office, and I've dabbled with that, but I need to bring Harvath back next year. So I've gotten going in a new manuscript. It's tough because I always joke around and I always drop the names of my buddies, James Rollins and Steve Barry, two wonderful authors, different than what I do. Their stuff is either a little bit of science and a lot of history with Steve Barry, or a lot of history and a little bit of science with, I'm actually flipping it. But I always joke that if I say my plots too early, both those guys will take them and run with them. It's just good-natured ribbing. David Morrell, who wrote Rambo, who's a fabulous thriller author. You don't think of international thrillers necessarily based on the Stallone movie Rambo, which I've loved all the movies. But David Morrell has been a great creative writing teacher, and he wrote a book about creative writing. And he said that when you know the plot of your next book, you shouldn't tell anybody other than your editor, because that is like baby names. I learned that very early on. When we told people what we thought we were naming the baby, everybody had an opinion, right? Oh, I had an ex-husband with that name. Don't use that name. I've only known guys who are jerks with that name. So it's supposed to power you through the entire year of writing the book. So I've got something in mind, but I love to beat the headlines with my books. And so I'm just starting to tweak it. But because we've got a year before it comes out, that's my IP. And so I'm really quiet about it. All I can say is action starts on page 1. It's going to take you around the world, crisp, cinematic, short chapters. The kind of stuff that you've come to appreciate in my thrillers. It's about all I can reveal. I feel terrible, John, not being able to give you, such a longtime reader, a peek.
Well, that's okay. You've given me many, many more pieces over the 20 years. And the one thing I really like is you give a little bit of, afterwards in some of the videos on your website, how you found the Lion of Lucerne and how you turn that into everything. BradThor.com is the website. That's a place to go because you got so much more material.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what we try to do. And we're about to release a little bit more, kind of a primer to read some of the research I did for Black Ice, just to get you in the mood. That's coming out tomorrow. So yeah, it's the Midwesterner, son of a Marine in me. I'm always trying to give my employers, those readers, just a little bit more.
Well, Brad, I appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you for 20 years, 20 plus years, 21 books, 20 with Harvath. And I, along with many other people, look forward to finally seeing a Lions of Lucerne film when it gets on the big screen. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed our talk today.
Thanks, John.
A big thank you to Brad Thor for taking time out of his busy schedule to join us for this week's podcast interview. Once again, the new book, Black Ice, the 20th thriller in the Scot Harvath series, available everywhere right now, and it's a great read. If you want a lot of other extra material related to Black Ice, the research, the videos that he has, just go to BradThor.com. A lot of extras put up there. Keep your eye out for the upcoming announcement regarding a potential Lions of Lucerne movie, and read that book too if you haven't read that one. And don't forget, you can follow Brad on all of his social media accounts. We're talking Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. If you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. Let us know what you think, and tell a friend about this interview and any others that you've heard. The more feedback and help we get from people like you, the higher we'll be listed on the podcast apps. The better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.